Welcome to Tame the Taboo. This podcast is brought to you by Discomfort Health. Discomfort Health specializes in healthcare, education, and resources for her most intimate concerns. I'm your host, Nurse Jenna Ray. I'm a women's health and gender-related nurse practitioner, and I am making it my business to take you from sufferer to sensei. So if you are suffering from conditions that are not easily treated in an annual exam, or you want to join me on this journey to become my healthiest, wealthiest, best business owning self, sit back, relax, and enjoy these episodes. Welcome back to the podcast. So, on today's episode of Tame the Taboo, I am so excited to have Noa Fleischacker with us. And Noa is the executive director of Tight-Lipped. And Tight-Lipped is described as a storytelling and advocacy organization by and for people with chronic vulvovaginal and pelvic pain conditions. And they fight for people with these conditions to be diagnosed correctly, treated effectively, and given compassionate care. And it is such an honor to have you today, Noa. And so welcome to Tame the Taboo.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and really excited to learn more about your work and to talk about all things vaginal and pelvic health.
Yes, I love it. One of the things I love about your organization is that I was actually introduced to Tight Lips by a client. So I had a client, some of you know, I'm Nurse Jenna. I am a women's health and gender related nurse practitioner, and I specialize in vulvovaginal conditions, so complex GYN, really all the things that take longer than an annual exam to cover. And so I was seeing a client and we have been seeing each other for a while and she had made great progress. And it was really one of those like great visits where clients are just coming in to say like, thank you, right? Those are like my favorite visits in the world. And so she came in and she had this magazine and she's like, have you heard of this? And I was like, no. And it's a beautiful magazine. It's like well produced, like on good paper, like that type of stuff matters. And I'm like, no, I haven't heard of it. And she's like, well, it's called Tight Lipped and you have to connect with them. It's so amazing. And you definitely just need to have this in your clinic. So I was like, okay, great. And I've just been a fangirl since that day because what you all are doing is so complementary to what we are doing, but you are really building the community that's necessary for people who have these chronic conditions.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the zine, the magazine that you're referring to, the zine, it really came out of us wanting to create a platform for people to share their stories with all sorts of different conditions that cause vulvar, vaginal, and pelvic pain. I feel like we also produced it during the pandemic when we were initially hoping that we could bring people together in person and, create. We had just run two of our first workshops where we actually brought a bunch of patients who have vaginal and pelvic pain together to talk about our stories and talk about experiences and struggles that they were having finding care. And we were hoping to do more of that, and that wasn't possible because of the pandemic. And so we created this zine, which is basically a booklet of stories and artwork and poetry and all sorts of different things. We actually have a digital version on our website with voice recordings where people read their stories out loud. And so that was really a beautiful and powerful way of helping people see that they're not alone and feel less isolated in their experiences, and also helping people understand that a lot of experiences that they have, both with like shame and stigma, and also with struggling to get care, are really universal and like really, really common and are not just like your fault or something that, just happened to you. And so that is something that we really wanted to be able to do. And I love hearing that people have found it powerful and are bringing it to their medical providers often.
Yes, they are bringing it to us. And I guess I can use the collective we, but as healthcare providers, we really appreciate it because we only have a short amount of time to be able to be in community with our clients.
Yeah.
Luckily for me, I get an hour, but most people, they only get 5-10 minutes with a patient. And so there's a gap in, okay, well, now that I've given you this diagnosis and I've given you your plan of care, you're going to need a whole lot more of that community, and where can I direct folks to be able to find that? So thank you.
Totally.
So tell me a little bit more about your story, Noah. Like, how did you become such a fierce advocate for this population?
So I'm a patient myself. Everyone who is involved in tight-lipped is a patient. And we also have incredible medical providers who we have a medical advisory board and providers who are part of the work that we do. But the leadership, volunteer leadership of the organization is all run by patients. Um, so when I have like I guess a pretty classic now, I know, like pretty classic story of like, I could never use tampons because tampons were really painful or just felt like impossible. And penetrative sex felt really painful and impossible. And when I went to get my first pelvic exam, my first pap smear, I went in and when the gynecologist tried to do the exam, like she tried to insert a speculum, it was so painful, I couldn't tolerate it at all. And her reaction to that was, "Oh, you're just nervous, like, you'll calm down." And she prescribed sedatives to kind of calm me down and help me get through the exam. And so I took the sedatives and I came back for like take two of my pap smear pelvic exam. And the exact same thing happened. Like she tried to insert the speculum. It was so painful. I could not tolerate it at all. Um, and her reaction was, "Oh, you didn't take enough sedatives. We need to do your exam under general anesthesia." So I went to the hospital, took the day, friend took me in, and I went under general anesthesia. I felt like really ridiculous when they were bringing me in, like the nurses who were putting in my IV were like chatting with me and they were like, "Wait, you're here for your pap smear and we're giving you an IV?" Like they were so confused. No one really knew what to do with me. And I didn't really know how to explain it. I was like, "I don't know. I'm just in a lot of pain. I don't really know how to explain it." And when I woke up, I kind of expected that they would like have some big reveal, like we found something really wild inside of you, or like, I don't know. I was expecting something like that. But instead, my gynecologist was like, "Great job. You got your pap smear. You can go home now. We'll see you next year." And that was it. And there was no conversation about like, why would I be in this level of pain from a routine exam? That's pretty bizarre and not normal. And she didn't ask me any questions about like anything else. If she had, she would have discovered that I have like chronic low back pain and tailbone pain and pretty intense period pain and all sorts of other things that usually go with pelvic floor dysfunction. Um, and so that really started me on my own personal journey as a patient, trying to find care and figure out what was going on. And um, at first, I felt really embarrassed about it. I thought, like, this is weird. I've never seen anyone, I've never heard anyone talk about this. This feels like such a unique experience that I don't think anyone else in the whole world has ever gone through. But as I started getting more and more frustrated with trying to get the care that I like needed but couldn't find, I opened up more about it and started talking more to friends and family and discovering that so many people in my life were dealing with something similar. And I mean, like, it was everywhere. And not just like strangers, but people who I was really close to who had been in my life for years. My best friend from childhood, my mom's friend from college, my boss at the time, like so many people who had been in my life were secretly dealing with something very similar. Even if they didn't have the same condition, they were dealing with some kind of vaginal or pelvic pain, some kind of chronic condition. Um, so for me, that really kind of broke things open of like what's going on here. And I was working as a political organizer and was like, okay, so clearly there's something going on, right? Like there's a systemic problem here. Like so many people are struggling to get care for vaginal and pelvic pain. And that's where like the initial like seeds for tight lips started, where I started talking to people about like, well, okay, if so many of us are struggling to be taken seriously, to find the care that we need, to access any kind of care. I mean, at the time when I was struggling to find someone who could treat me, I was also like a very privileged patient, white, like with access to good health insurance, and I was still being gaslit. So it's like, okay, this I cannot imagine what's happening to patients who are less privileged and who are also like experiencing medical racism or who can't even afford to like take time off work to go to all these different doctor's appointments. I can
I love that during your own journey, you were still thinking about other people and how you used your skills and your knowledge that you already have to say, okay, I'm frustrated with this situation and I'm going to fix the issue, but not just for me, but for everybody else behind me. That is an amazing, amazing quality to have because so many of us are in our own heads and in our own bodies, and we think that like it's just me. And even if I was to find a cure, I'm not going to talk to anybody else about it, right? I'm just going to like go and be cured. But you are like, no, I'm a community organizer. I'm a trailblazer. I'm an advocate. I'm going to do these things for myself and for everybody else behind me. That is dope.
Thank you. Well, I think it's also like for me, a big part of like learning about political and community organizing was learning about like understanding the deeper issues that lead people to struggle with things that you feel like are deeply personal, right? So, if I go to my doctor and the doctor, for example, the gynecologist I was talking about earlier, doesn't ask me anything about why, like, what are my different symptoms? Um, why am I in this pain? Like, where is that coming from? She doesn't ask me any questions about it. I think for a while, I kind of internalized that as like, oh, well, maybe I just didn't do a good enough job advocating for myself. Maybe I didn't give her the right information. Maybe I went to see the wrong doctor. And for me, when it was like reframed as like, this is a political problem, like our gynecologists across the country are not actually learning about these conditions. They aren't actually required to ask those questions. They don't even know what questions to ask. Then it became clear, like, wait, I am far from the only person going through this. And actually, I probably had an easier experience than a lot of people because I even could take time off work and like go to multiple doctors um and was able to have that covered by my insurance. So, yeah, just that like frustration and anger, and then trying to figure out, well, where do you go if you're a frustrated patient, for other medical conditions? Like, there's a history of like patient activism and patient advocacy. And there's like all if you have breast cancer, if you have um mental health conditions, like these conditions used to be extremely, extremely stigmatized, but then patients actually fought together for change. And it's like incredibly inspiring to think about like, okay, even a few decades ago, you could never talk about having breast cancer. You could not talk about having depression. Like those weren't things that people were open about. And we're in a drastically different landscape now because of the patients who made that change. And so for me, it was like, well, where are the people doing that on these conditions? And of course, that doesn't really exist or didn't exist. And now it's starting to exist.
Because of you, right? Because you're
Yeah,
like,
so
where are these people?
the work that we're trying to do. Yeah. So that's
And you're like, "Here I am, okay." So you were called to do this work, and it's unfortunate that you had to have those experiences of not being heard, not being listened to, not given the care that you deserve. Because if someone sat down and explained to you what a pap smear is, right? That we are looking for signs of cervical cancer, that cervical cancer is typically caused by the human papillomavirus, which is passed sexually, and you're probably at a low risk of having cervical cancer if you've never been able to have penetrative sex, right? Then maybe you wouldn't have signed up to go under general anesthesia to test for something that's, of course, going to come back completely normal, and you could have used that energy and those resources to figure out why can't I be intimate? Why can't I use a tampon? So it really is, it's so basic as to like educating, like healthcare education and resources are the her and Discover Health. And it is so essential because you can really pivot and make a lot of decisions that might create a different outcome if you have a true understanding of why things are being done.
totally. And that was not, I mean, I think I had a basic understanding of what the pap smear was for, but I didn't have any understanding of like, well, what are the different conditions that could cause someone to be in pain from even something like a pap smear? I had never heard the words like even pelvic pain. I would not have said, "Oh, I have vaginal pain." I wouldn't have said I had any of these things. I didn't even conceptualize it as like, "Oh, this is a medical condition, and here are all the different symptoms that are part of that condition." Um, and there wasn't the diagnosis terms definitely vulvodynia, pelvic floor dysfunction, vaginismus, vestibulodynia, lichen sclerosis. None of those are terms that have really entered the like mainstream conversation. And so I would have never been like, oh, I have vulvodynia. Like most people aren't saying that because most people don't have that diagnosis and like don't have the terms to be able to give themselves a diagnosis.
Yet. Most people don't have it yet. That's why the work that we're doing here today, hopefully we can reach a lot of women and then they'll be able to have the terms to be able to even start a simple Google search. Because if
Right.
you don't know like what to search on Google, even though we're living in the age of information and technology, you have to have a basic understanding to be even, you know, started on the right path to figuring out what the heck is going on.
Right, right, right. And you're not right. If you're just Googling like pain with sex, like you're not going to end up finding what you need to find or finding the way to a diagnosis.
Yeah. And what's so special about what you did and what other advocates are doing who have pelvic pain is that as providers, we don't want to look silly, right? So hopefully when you see your gynecologist or you see your nurse practitioner, you are armed with information, that's a challenge to them, right? So if you come in and you say, I have been diagnosed with vulvodynia, what can you do for me? That's a different conversation because now they're going to go in the back and be like, well, let me research vulvodynia. And even if they don't know how to treat it, hopefully what they can do is figure out who does and refer you to the right resources. So advocating for yourself challenges your providers and it's going to change the experience of every woman that comes into that office after you.
Totally. And I always feel like those one of the most powerful things that a medical provider can say and look, I don't know and I'm not familiar with this condition, but I'm going to work with you to try to figure it out. One of the best medical appointments I ever had was a doctor who was like, beyond what you've already tried, I don't know what else to tell you. But she like took the time to explain the research that she knew about what options she was aware of and to figure out who she could send me to and refer me to someone who was more familiar and more specialized. And that can be so powerful because I think a lot of us end up in this situation where because, there's a lot of pressure put on medical providers to have all the answers and to, give you the answer that you're looking for. Then you end up in this situation where patients are told by their medical providers, like, oh, maybe just like use lube or just drink a glass of wine or these kind of like suggestions that are really not medical advice and are also sometimes incredibly harmful, right? Like we have patients in our community who were told, "Oh, just get drunk, just drink a glass of wine," as very young, like young patients, 18, 19, 20. And then they end up in really dangerous and harmful situations where they think like, okay, I'm just in pain because I'm not, drunk enough
Mark it
or,
up.
um, and it's so powerful when a provider can just say like, I never learned this information. I don't have it, but I'm going to help you find someone who does and refer you to that person or work with you to figure out what to do.
That's awesome. And if we can, as providers, not gaslight people, we
Yes.
could that's a form of harm reduction, right? It's just saying, I don't know. I will not gaslight you. I will not let my ego stand in the way of you getting the answers.
Yeah.
So we need a heavy dose of that as providers. And what it's gonna take is women like you coming in, kicking in the door and saying, okay, I know that you cannot help me, but let's figure this out together. Let's figure out what my resources are.
Right. At the very least, believing your patients, right? And taking people seriously and saying, like, yes, your pain is real. We're going to figure out what's causing it. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
that's
love it.
actually tied to a big part of what we're advocating for, which is Tight Lips' whole project right now is about OBGYN training and education and the fact that most OBGYNs, the programs that they go to don't provide any kind of comprehensive training on what these conditions are, what causes vaginal pain, pelvic pain, vulvar pain, um, and then how to diagnose and treat patients who come in with these symptoms. That's just missing from most OBGYN residency programs, and none of the like national requirements really require that that's going to be taught. And so a big part of the work that we're doing is advocating for OBGYN residency programs to incorporate that training and education. Because even if you just learn the basics of like, if a patient had these symptoms, what are the possible conditions? What are the first line treatments? And also where to refer people if you don't know how to manage their condition. That would drastically change people's experiences. And even if when you come in for your annual gynecology appointment, if your provider was actually actively asking you questions, do you have pain with sex? Do you have constipation? Do you have pain wearing tight pants? If you were actively being asked, proactively being asked those questions, that would change things for so many people who are just like not even at baseline getting a diagnosis or getting any kind of treatment.
Absolutely. And I think as a provider, I know that I don't ask questions that I don't have the tools to help. And so if a provider is asking about painful intercourse and they have no idea how to help you with that painful intercourse, they're not going to keep asking because it's like,
Right.
okay, everybody's answering yes on this questionnaire, but what do I do with this next? And so a part of the work that I'm doing is working to train other clinicians. And it's really been one of my favorite parts of doing this work in pelvic pain is being able to be a professor at Georgetown and teach all about these complex conditions in their school of nursing. And as I venture out on my own into this world of like business and entrepreneurship, is really kind of baking it into the cake of what I do as a business owner is making sure that I'm bringing other clinicians along. Because I like to say I'm revolutionizing women's health and it's not just me. I can't do it alone. I have to train an
Yeah.
army of people to back me up.
That's amazing. And yeah, I'd love to learn more about kind of what that looks like, especially because it's so, so crucial to get that information and training into nurse practitioner education, OBGYN education, family medicine, right? Pediatricians. I mean, if people knew that these conditions were real and were out there, we could catch them a lot earlier. And I think for a lot of people in our community, unfortunately, because of the years of misdiagnosis or gaslighting or dismissal, they end up having more complex cases. Like, I can't tell you the number of people, myself included, who are like, okay, well, if when I was a teenager, if someone had asked me these questions and if I had actually gotten to like pelvic floor physical therapy when I was 15 or gotten some kind of treatment earlier on, would that actually have made my case way less complicated and much easier to treat because it would have been caught earlier on and wouldn't have gone on for like 5, 10 years, even a decade or more than a decade.
Mhm. Definitely. Yeah, so if there are any providers that are interested in learning more about this work, I have created a Facebook group and it is free. You can join and it's called Tame the Taboo Clinicians. And so I just like to pour into the group and share as many resources as possible with people who are a part of it. And so we're working on the offerings as far as like how do I deliver this type of education instead of just on a one-on-one case the way that I'm doing it right now, can I do that, one to many? And so that is the offer that I'm working on right now. So I'm very excited to see what we can do with that. But yeah, it's on Facebook. If you just search Tame the Taboo Clinicians, lots of free resources there.
That's
Mhm.
amazing. It's such important work. I love that that's what you're doing. And I think it's so incredible how even just as soon as a clinician or any kind of medical provider is trained on these conditions, like it just makes such a difference. It can be such an incredibly different experience for the patients who are coming into office and who are often feeling really uncomfortable talking about their symptoms. It's the symptoms that we talk about are really stigmatized and hard to talk about.
Yep. And we cannot put the onus on patients to ask the questions and bring us the information as providers and as clinicians. We really have to start to take this work up and do it ourselves. So it's really a symbiotic relationship for trailblazers like you and for clinicians like me to be working together to create that change because 10 years from now, hopefully it will be a lot more conversation and resources and action being taken around intimate health and wellness. So I'm excited to see that grow.
Yeah, I'm excited for the day when, like, going to the gynecologist, you're asked all these questions about pelvic pain just like as a normal screening, and it's not a big deal. And where if you have pain, it's just like talking about, oh, I have a UTI or I have a yeast infection, which like have become things that like people know are very common and normal and not normal to go untreated, but normal to be dealing with. And that you can just talk about it both with like friends and family, but also that you can just go to your medical provider and they know what to say and what to do.
Yep. So in the meantime, there is a resource that we have. If you visit quiz.tamethetaboo.co, you can take a quiz, and then what we'll give you is a HIPAA compliant PDF directly into your email so that you can basically answer all of these questions that I would typically ask in my exam for my pelvic pain clients. And then you can take that information to your healthcare provider and it just gets the information out there and gets the conversation started. So that is
That's
quiz.tamethetaboo.co.
okay. I'm definitely going to look that up. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, tell us about other projects. If people are listening and they're like, I want to get involved with Tight Lip, what else is going on right now and how can we join?
Yeah, great question. So we start as a storytelling organization. So we have a bunch of different ways of accessing those stories and community. So we have a podcast, which is called Tight Lipped on any podcasting platform. We have the zine, which is both digital and hard copy, a booklet of stories and people's experiences with vaginal and pelvic pain. You can order a copy on our website, or you can access the digital copy on our website. And then the main way to get involved is to join our newsletter and join upcoming programming and events. So we have virtual and in-person programs and events. At the moment, we have tight-lipped communities and chapters in New Haven, Connecticut, New York City, Los Angeles, San Diego, and Philadelphia, with growing communities in other cities like DC and Boston. Um, and so if you're in one of those cities and you're interested in getting involved, there's plenty of stuff going on in person. We have social events, community events, and then weekly strategy meetings to talk about OBGYN residency education and collaborate with local OBGYN residents and providers. And then for folks who aren't in those cities, we do have national virtual events. Those are always publicized through our newsletter and opportunities to kind of meet other community members and get involved in the advocacy and organizing work that we're doing.
I love that. And in the age of information and technology, everybody is on socials. So, can you just shout out your social media page and handles?
Yeah. So best place to find us is on Instagram. You can also find us on Facebook. And the social handle is at tightlipped.org. So ORG at the end, just tightlipped and then ORG. And that's where you can find us basically anywhere. Website is tightlipped.org, Facebook, Instagram, and then our email, which is info@tightlipped.org.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I enjoy following you, and I'm so looking forward to all of the work that you guys are producing. And it is so good to have an army of clients who are helping to really move the needle in this area.
Yeah, we need all the help and support we can get. So I'm excited about the work that you're doing and really excited to just get to talk to you, Jenna, and also ready for that army to be, patients and providers fighting for better care for people with these conditions across the country.
Definitely, definitely. Well, thank you for taking time out of your day and for sharing a little bit of your story. And I look forward to continuing working with you. Know it's really been a pleasure.
Thanks, you too. It was great talking to you.
Yeah. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Tame the Taboo. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe. Send this to your girlfriend so they can join you on your journey as we transition to our healthiest, wealthiest, best selves. See you in the next episode.